crackdown in the Twin Cities. In this hour, we're tackling the subject of privacy. For the last 2 months, protesters and so-called ICE observers have been on the streets of the Twin Cities and beyond, documenting and calling attention to immigration enforcement activity. But a troubling trend has emerged. NPR News and other media outlets have documented multiple instances of federal agents using surveillance technology, from facial recognition to social media monitoring, to identify immigrants and track protesters. So tonight, we'll talk with 2 experts about the legal limits of using these tools. What questions do you have about what this means for your privacy? You can give us a call at 651-227-6000.
Said the Democrats insisted on it, so those discussions will get underway, but ultimately that's going to be a conversation between the President of the United States and the Democrats here in the Senate.
Even if DHS runs out of money next week, Immigration and Customs Enforcement still has an extra $75 billion approved by Congress last summer to use over the next 4 years. Sam Greenglass, NPR News, Washington.
South Carolina officials are reporting 29 new measles cases since last Friday as the nation's largest outbreak in decades continues to spread. NPR's Maria Godoy reports it's not the only state with an active outbreak.
With 876 cases so far, South Carolina's measles outbreak is getting a lot of attention. But other states are also battling outbreaks of the extremely contagious disease. In North Carolina, officials are reporting 15 cases of measles since December. Many of them are linked to the South Carolina outbreak, whose epicenter is in Spartanburg County, near the state border. Arizona has reported 24 cases this year alone, while officials in Utah say an outbreak that began last year has grown to more than 230 cases. Infectious disease experts say as vaccination rates continue to decline, outbreaks of a disease that was once declared eliminated in the U.S. are starting to become the new normal. Maria Godoy, NPR News.
President Trump is demanding $1 billion in damages from Harvard University. NPR's Alyssa Nadworny reports it's the latest update on a months-long negotiation to reach a deal with the elite school and resolve the administration's claims of anti-Semitism on campus.
Trump's comments come from a post on Truth Social, following reporting in the New York Times that a Harvard deal would not include cash demands. The White House has made several deals with elite universities in the last year. In a deal with Columbia University, the school agreed to pay more than $200 million to the federal government. In another deal with Brown University, the school agreed to pay $50 million to workforce development training in Rhode Island over the next 10 years. Harvard University has not commented on the ongoing negotiations. Alyssa Nadworny, NPR News.
Air travelers in the U.S. without a real ID or another acceptable form of identification now have to pay $45 and go through an alternate verification option called Confirm ID. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Cy Sims Foundation. Since 1985, supporting advances in science, education, and the arts towards a fairer, more just, and civil society. More information is available at cysimsfoundation.org.
In the Twin Cities, I'm Elena C. for NPR News. A man charged with assaulting Representative Ilhan Omar at a town hall meeting will remain in custody. A federal judge ruled earlier today that Anthony Kazmierzak must stay in jail and said he believed he could be a danger to the community if released. Kazmierzak faces federal charges for allegedly approaching Omar at a town hall last week and spraying her with a liquid in a syringe. A lab analysis found the liquid was likely apple cider vinegar. Kazmierzak will return to the Sherburne County Jail, where his attorney says he's being held in solitary confinement due to publicity around his name and around the case. He also faces state charges. Children's Minnesota announced today that it will be pausing some gender-affirming care services. Erica Zurich reports.
Gender-affirming care for transgender youth remains legal in Minnesota, and Children's Minnesota's gender health program is still open. But the hospital says it will pause prescribing puberty-suppressing medications and hormones to patients under the age of 18 in its gender health program on February 27th. This decision is due to federal actions targeting pediatric health systems and trans health care. Children's Minnesota says these threats make it difficult for their clinicians to practice medicine now and in the future. The hospital will continue to provide care, mental health services, and guidance on both medical and non-medical treatment options for patients and their families. I'm Erica Zurich.
Minnesota's Lindsey Vaughn says she still plans to compete at the Olympics in Italy this weekend, despite suffering a serious knee injury in a crash during a ski race last week. The alpine skiing star told reporters today that she ruptured her ACL. Still, Vaughn says she's confident she can race at the Winter Games.
As long as I can keep it stable, as long as I have the brace on, as long as I have no swelling and my muscles are activating appropriately, I should be okay. But I can't guarantee what it's going to feel like once I get into some of the big turns, and that's what we'll have to see after the first training run.
The Olympic women's downhill race is on Sunday. This is NPR News.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Richer. You're listening to NPR News. We're glad you could join us for our continued live special coverage of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown in the Twin Cities. This hour, we're going to be talking about a new era in federal immigration enforcement that's deploying tools like facial recognition software and social media monitoring to identify migrants and surveil protesters. It's a trend that's troubling privacy experts and First Amendment advocates and causing concern among protesters and people documenting ICE activities in the Twin Cities and beyond. So tonight, we'll talk with a legal expert and a journalist about where the law draws the line on using these tools, what it means for your privacy, and we want to know what questions you have about the expansion of digital surveillance by the federal government. What do you want to know about what your digital footprint can reveal? And do you have a story to share about being surveilled by federal agents? You can join our conversation. Just call 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Now I'm going to bring in our guests. We have William McGivern. He is the Dean of the University of Minnesota Law School, where he teaches data privacy. Thanks for being with us, Bill.
Thanks so much for having me.
And we also have Shubhanjana Das. She is a reporter with the Sahan Journal. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Shubhanjana, I want to start just by playing a clip from some of the reporting that my colleague John Collins did last month. This story starts by profiling a couple named Judy and Noah Levy. They're, like many people, that have been engaged in serving as ICE observers. These are people who are watching and documenting and calling attention to ICE enforcement activities. And they were stopped by federal agents. Here's the cut.
Agents took photos of Levy and other observers' license plates. Then, a masked agent walked up to Judy Levy's passenger side window.
And he looked at me and said, "Hello, Judith, how are you today?" I didn't respond, and then he said it a couple of times.
The Levys were shaken, but continued to follow when the federal agent's caravan started up again. That's when Noah Levy says they noticed that the ICE vehicles had turned onto Levy's own street.
The first thing that went through my head was, no, they're not. They can't be. This is like something out of a bad movie. But they did it.
They did.
So, Shubhanjana, I'm wondering, when you hear this story, what stands out to you most?
I think it definitely echoes what I've been hearing from people when I talked about how surveillance manifests itself. And this is in line with what observers or ICE observers, patrollers told me, that if they were tailing ICE cars, they would sometimes be led back to their homes. This is unfortunately not the first time that I've heard a version of this, of how they would walk up to people and without any prior interaction with them, they would be able to address them by their first names. And it's a very intentional move for them because they are trying to say, we know who you are already. That's the same with leading them back to their houses. We know who you are already. I have heard versions of the story from people I spoke to for mine. Yeah.
And Shubhanjana, as you're talking to people who've experienced this, like, what's the emotional effect on folks you've interviewed?
I think there's definitely a lot of this is to instill fear and intimidation and to instill the sense of like, we are watching you, we are watching every move, and that's bound to spook some people. And some folks have told me that they have had to take a break from observing activities because they didn't want to endanger more vulnerable people in their lives. And there's also this sense of we're losing people, like people are losing lives. How do I think about surveillance right now? So there's also that sense, but I think when things like these happen, when surveillance manifests itself in this way, when you're followed back to your own home, I think that definitely has a chilling effect on whether that person is able to step out of their home tomorrow to a protest or to observe.
Yeah, I can imagine. And Bill, what about you? When you hear that clip, what stands out to you?
I mean, I think it's chilling, in part because, exactly as Subhajana says, it's definitely intended to intimidate. And, it sounds like these people were merely exercising completely constitutionally protected First Amendment rights. The First Amendment is meant to allow you to observe officers, allow you to film them, provided you do not interfere with their activities. Those are constitutionally protected activities. And yet this is a way of saying, well, it might not be that we have a lawful way to stop you from doing this, but we have this other way to persuade you to stop. And that makes me extremely uncomfortable.
Okay, and I just want to ask, because we have heard of many instances of people being led back to their homes, being addressed by their first name, their license plates being taken a picture of and run through a system. Bill, is that legal if someone is, legitimately just participating in ICE observation?
Well, so you could make an argument, and I'm sure people will make this argument in lawsuits to come, that it is a violation of the First Amendment to attempt to intimidate or coerce protesters who are engaging in activity. But in terms of getting their hands on the information, there's probably not any law that's stopping that because license plates are out in public view, and the DHS has invested, millions and millions of dollars in sophisticated databases that allow them to take one piece of information and learn a great deal more about you. And that's all also public information that there's not particular restraints on them using.
Okay. Now, Shubhanjana, just going back to your reporting, what other tactics have you encountered that people might find intimidating?
Yeah, like Bill said, these agents, over 3,000 of them now in the Twin Cities, they are all equipped with their work-sanctioned phones with the surveillance technology. Now, think about that. Think about over 3,000 federal agents, and think about just the Twin Cities and the surveillance capacity that they have. And I am talking about just surveillance they can do on the go to determine who's following them, who's irritating them. Just, I don't want to be followed by this car. I'm just going to go ahead and snap a photo. And they've been telling people, oh, now you're just in a sweet little database. And they are obviously using facial recognition. Now, facial recognition is perhaps one of the most visible forms of this surveillance that we have been seeing. If somebody declines to provide their ID saying that they are a citizen, we are seeing instances where they would just quietly pull up their phone, scan their faces, and there has been an instance of them doing this to a Somali person who posted this on their social media, and they just quietly walk away after, probably because they see that this person is not arrestable in their database. That's what they see. And there's multiple other technologies that these agents are equipped with. Again, I want to stress.
Yeah, say more about maybe things that are like less visible and less obvious.
Absolutely. So two of the things that really concern me, especially when it comes to what they're able to do just on the go, first are stingrays. Stingrays are something that we're learning about as we go. And as I talk about this, I want to stress that there's a deep lack of transparency. Even though we know some of the names and some of the technology they're using, we still don't know what kind of database they're pulling from, what kind of database they're adding to, exactly the extent of what they have access to. But there are stingrays. These are devices that are mobile devices that are built to basically imitate cell phone towers and trick your phones into coordinating with these devices. These are also called IMSI catchers, so they are able to get the unique identity of your phone, and then what they are doing with it, we don't know. That's where the lack of transparency comes in. There's another app that they're using called Elite. It's an acronym. And using Elite, they're able to think of using as Google Maps. But what these agents are able to do is they're able to drop a map of their own wish, of a neighborhood, a block, whatever it may be. And this technology throws up a list of deportable targets for them in that entire neighborhood. And it provides a dossier on each of these targets and gives them a confidence score on their address. For example, 87% confidence score on X person lives in this address. And something that's deeply concerning about that, as I talk to experts, is that the communities they are targeting, especially here in the Twin Cities, immigrant communities tend to live together in a neighborhood. If we talk about Somali communities, their businesses perhaps are concentrated in one neighborhood. So it's extremely easy for them to drop such a map of targets and just go after it, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Bill, this sounds like a really complicated, network of tools. I mean, kind of what are you seeing, and what protections do people have against them, these tools being used, against them?
Yeah. So, a jaw-dropping number that I saw recently was that the amount of money that the Department of Homeland Security was spending on technology was going to go up from $11 billion last year to $18 billion this year. So that $7 billion extra dollars is getting added to a huge array of tools, just as Subhanjana says. The protections are not nearly catching up to that technology. And really one of the biggest reasons is that the main tool that we normally have to constrain police behavior is the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. It's old. It's served us very well. It still is something that prevents law enforcement from barging into your house without a warrant legally. But all of this information that they're capturing in public is not protected in the same way. You don't have necessarily the same reasonable expectation of privacy as you're walking or driving down the street. So, they have an app on their phone. It's called Mobile Fortify, and they snap a photo, and the photo immediately links, as we've said, with a database that has an enormous amount of information and an overlay of AI that summarizes and synthesizes that information to give them very quick responses. All of that information is out there in a way that the Fourth Amendment is not equipped to handle. And so without other kinds of laws like Congress passing something, the Constitution itself is not up to the job.
If you're just joining our conversation, we're talking tonight with a legal expert and a journalist about how digital surveillance tools are being used by the federal government during the immigration crackdown in Minnesota. What questions do you have about what this means for your privacy? What do you want to know about your rights? What questions do you have about your digital footprint and what it can reveal? And if you have a story to share about being surveilled by federal agents, we want to hear from you as well. Join our conversation, 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. I want to go now to a call from Andrea in St. Paul. Andrea, what do you want to share with us?
Hi, I am a lawyer in St. Paul, and I am not an immigration lawyer. I am by practice an education law attorney, but I have taken a number of pro bono cases involving immigrants and their rights. to be here lawfully in the country. And I also have represented protesters, including at least one protester who was falsely accused of injuring an ICE agent. And I've had a number of things happen over the last week or so that I absolutely cannot prove lead to the conclusion that I'm being surveilled by the federal government, but they are unusual events that I have not experienced before.
Can you say more about that, Andrea? What's happened to you?
So roughly a week ago, I was in the neighborhood where I live, which is a very comfortable neighborhood, and I went in to have my hair done, and when I came out, one of my tires had been slashed. And then last night, actually in the middle of the night, I started to get notifications that there were personal details in my bank account that were being changed. And then this morning I spoke with my bank, and they were able to share with me that somebody using my credentials went into my bank account, changed my phone number to the phone number of my spouse, who is not on the bank account, who doesn't have that login information, and took no money, and which is a very unusual way of having your bank account hacked into. I can't say who is responsible for that. And as I said to the woman I spoke to previously, these are very unusual things for me to say. It feels bizarre to be saying these things happen to me, but they're unusual and they're uncomfortable and they're not inconsistent with what I hear other lawyers saying who are doing this kind of work.
Mm-hmm. Well, Andrea, I want to ask you, I mean, it sounds like you are not typically doing immigration law or helping people in the situations that you find yourself helping in, but did the things that have happened to you give you pause in maybe continuing to do that work?
They don't. I'm not. That sounds like I'm braver than I am, because I can't say that isn't intimidating. But I do think that the more attention you draw to these kinds of situations, the safer you probably are. We are talking about people who are extremely vulnerable, who have every right to be here, who have left homes that were extremely dangerous with the belief that they would be safe here. It feels like the most patriotic thing that I can do. So I don't feel like I should stop. I feel like I should double down. But
Andrea, I want to give our guests here a chance to respond. Shubhanjana, just going back to something you mentioned really briefly earlier, is like a chilling effect on some of the activism that we've seen. You know, we know that lawyers who don't typically do immigration law have been out helping people who need that assistance right now. Can you just say more about like the fear that people may already be feeling, and also knowing now that maybe their identities are maybe a little more vulnerable out there in the world?
Yeah, hearing Andrea speak sort of felt like re-listening to one of my interviews, or multiple of my interviews, really. It's the same sense of, it is intimidating. I am supporting people who are extremely, perhaps much more vulnerable than I am, but I don't want to put them in jeopardy. I don't want to put them in the way of harm. And also the sense of, no, I'm not going to back down. Like I said, it is an extreme, and I also just want to respond because Andrea said that it feels bizarre. There's no way of like really verifying what's happening. That is also not new to me. I have had people tell me that they have been followed by tinted SUVs. Of course, there was no way for them to confirm if it was just a tinted SUV driven by any other person, or if it was an agent following them for 2 days. So much so that they considered, getting a room in a hotel so that they feel safe somewhat. So I just want to say those bizarre experiences they're not happening in isolation. And we don't know the extent. And this is what's chilling, is that there's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know about what's informing this database. How correct is this database? I've studied multiple instances of when these agents would rather believe a database than a person who's screaming at them, I'm a citizen. But if the app tells them they are not, you do not stand a chance. And I think that's what's really terrifying people, is that, well, what do we do? What do we know? What's the extent of how much they know about me? And I think I can say with some confidence that we don't.
Bill, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And what might people want to know if they are trying to protect their privacy more?
Yeah, so, I mean, as the dean of a law school, it's very chilling to think that lawyers would be targeted for intimidation. But I'm afraid I'm not surprised to hear that. This DHS has a large contract with the surveillance technology company Palantir. They've designed a sort of mother of all databases for them, which is called Immigration OS. And it slurps up all kinds of information, consumer information, motor vehicles records, social media accounts, all kinds of data that's out there, either public or semi-public. Medical records, some states' Medicaid records. The list goes on, and it's, as you say, an incomplete list.
Yeah.
And by synthesizing all of that, the detail and extensiveness of the dossier on each person that's in there is substantial. Of course, could also be full of errors, but is substantial. So, I mean, I'm afraid I have to say that when it comes to yourself engaging in self-help to not get sucked into that database, I don't think it's possible. I mean, all of us live in the world, even if you went off social media and didn't get a driver's license and didn't see the doctor, you'd still have to buy something on Amazon. You'd still have to transact your normal life. And that's the power of a gigantic Palantir database like this, is it is unavoidable.
I want to take a call now from Eric in St. Cloud. Eric, what do you want to share with us?
Well, I just want to share with everyone that, in my opinion, I'm 100% supportive of any surveillance that federal government wants to put on the American people, even though I don't fully trust government in a lot of their things they may do. But in my opinion, if you're not doing anything wrong, what do you have to worry about? And if you can catch criminals driving a stolen car by surveillance at traffic signs or whatever it may be, I'm all for keeping everybody in the United States safe. And if the government needs to take that extreme measure, then do it. And I have a lot of friends that fully disagree with me on this, but I also have friends that do agree with it. And I just wanted to share that comment.
Thank you, Eric. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's a common sentiment you hear. If you have nothing to hide, then what are you worried about? The concern, of course, is, first of all, the inaccuracies that are possible. But also, this is the way that we keep the government in check. And the Founding Fathers, when they wrote the Constitution and wrote the Fourth Amendment, definitely believed that a government that had that kind of unchecked power was a danger to everybody, whether you're doing something quote unquote wrong or not, because it's whatever the government thinks is wrong, which could include just protesting against them and nothing more.
Bill, can you say more about how the Fourth Amendment might apply here, especially as it concerns, protections that people who are doing ICE Watch might want to know about?
So, I mean, the First Amendment is actually in some ways more important, because the First Amendment is protecting the activity, right? If you're protesting, that's something that is a freedom of expression that the Constitution mandates the government is not supposed to interfere with. And so there are protections for peaceful protests that the First Amendment provides. Now, of course, while you're being driven back to your house, or while someone's snapping a picture of you, that might not feel like great comfort, but it is the legal provision that's there to back you up. The Fourth Amendment has it's very strong where it applies, but there's something called the third party doctrine, which basically says if someone else has the information, not you, it's not necessarily covered by this protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. So if your bank has information, if your phone company has information, if Facebook has information or Google, those things are already out there, is what Fourth Amendment doctrine says. There are some statutes in some cases that can protect you, but nothing we've talked about in the half hour so far is anything that I can think is covered by one of the special statutes that might apply.
If you're just joining our conversation, we are talking with a legal expert and a journalist about how digital surveillance tools are being used by federal agents during the immigration crackdown here in Minnesota. My guests include William McGivern. He is the dean of the University of Minnesota Law School, where he also teaches data privacy. And we have Shubhanjana Das. She is a reporter with the Sahan Journal who's been reporting on this subject. They're taking your questions. What do you want to know about what all of this means for your privacy? What do you want to know about your rights? And what questions do you have about your digital footprint and what it can reveal? We also want to know if you have a story to share about being surveilled by federal agents during the immigration crackdown. You can call us at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. I want to go now to a comment that was made on Facebook by Tremaine. They wrote that people should know iPhones are selling your data and Walmart cams do the same. Bill, is that accurate? And what should people know about, the sort of like the private consumer market selling and passing on data?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of consumer data, and there's data brokers that make their business, their multi-billion-dollar business, at collecting and aggregating information. And it's kind of what I was referring to before when I said it's unavoidable to some degree, because if you're living in this world, you're leaving what they call a data trail. And it goes from facial recognition and other biometrics to information about your consumer preferences that algorithms and AI can use to make other assumptions about you, to all kinds of government records. The consumer databases are particularly troubling because they're out there as products that get sold, and sometimes the government, including the Department of Homeland Security, is the customer. They just buy it the same way a marketing company would buy it, and they add that data into the databases they already have to make them even more powerful.
I want to go also now to a comment from Ray in Virginia. They called in, couldn't hold, but they left us a note. They wrote that Walz has been saying for protesters to document agents. Isn't it hypocritical to say the government cannot do the same? I mean, Bill, Ray does raise a good point here. I mean, what are the protections that, ICE agents might have being filmed, but also, we've heard of some being doxxed too in their line of work.
I mean, doxing a DHS agent is illegal, and I don't have a problem with that. It should be. I mean, to the extent that it's people trying to do their job and you are engaging in harassing behavior, that's breaking the law. But the First Amendment
is filming ICE
totally
doing
legal.
enforcement.
So,
is that harassing?
I don't think so. No. So the First Amendment draws a line between observing and documenting, which is what Governor Walz has talked about, and interfering, which is a crime, or harassing, which is a crime. So it's very important that protesters use their rights alongside responsibilities. There's lines that you should not cross when you are engaging in your First Amendment freedom of expression. But the lines are really pretty clear in the law. And I think what the governor is suggesting is that people who stay on the correct side of the line should do that, because it's a way of documenting what the law enforcement is doing and hopefully creating some incentives for them to behave properly.
I do want to get your reaction to some news just yesterday, and that's that federal agents here in Minnesota are not going to be required to wear body cams. That's per Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Shubhanjana, from a documentation and reporting perspective, does this change anything?
I would have to wait and see how accessible that body cam footage is to us to be able to know and to confidently say that that's evidence we can access. So I am cautiously optimistic, I suppose.
It is, though.
And Bill, what about you?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. So it's great to be able to hope that there's footage of police behavior, and it's often been promulgated in municipal police departments and other places as a tool for accountability. But the state of Minnesota has a law that says you cannot use facial recognition in connection with body cameras because, of course, the concern is having a constant record of everything the officer sees is also a constant source of facial recognition data. That's a state law in Minnesota. It is not applicable to those federal agents. So it is both a potential source of accountability and also a potential source of surveillance. Mm-hmm. And also, by the way, the Homeland Security officials said today that they're not going to really be on the street for 6 months.
Right. Okay. We have a caller in Minneapolis who didn't want to give their name, it looks like, but we'll happily take your call. What do you want to share with us?
Well, I wanted to ask about how secure the share information online, especially companies like Google, more specifically their email system Gmail. They say that they collect data to improve their product and services. But I am very skeptical about that. So my concern is how secure to share, your private data on product like Gmail. And, I know some of the, companies have encryption to encryption, but I don't know if Gmail has that or not.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Yeah.
Bill, I want to give Bill a chance to respond here. And this kind of gets back to that accessing private data, right?
It does. Right. So this is a place where there is law that does help, at least when it comes to the contents of your email. So Congress passed a statute decades ago called the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. And even if the Fourth Amendment might not protect certain kinds of electronic data, this law does protect some. So, for example, it does protect, in most cases, it's complicated and there's exceptions, but in most cases, the contents of your emails are covered by your privacy rights unless law enforcement gets sort of a proper court authorization warrant. There's still what's called metadata, right? So, for example, in telephoning, they can't wiretap and listen to your calls, but there's a much lower legal standard for them to find out who did you call and when did you call them and how long did you talk to them and where were you when you called them if you're on a cell phone. All of that data that's not your actual communications has less protection, but still some. All of that is better protected than the stuff that's in the Palantir database, which really Congress hasn't got around to passing a law about that because that Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which was originally aimed at wiretapping and bugs, has been around for decades, and it's been able to be applied to these new technologies, but not to Palantir, not to Stingray that we mentioned before.
If you're just joining our conversation, we're talking tonight about how digital surveillance tools are being used by the federal government during its immigration crackdown in Minnesota. We want to know what questions you have about your privacy right now. If you have been documenting ICE or protesting, have you encountered a situation where you felt like you were surveilled by federal agents? And what do you want to know about what your digital footprint can reveal? You can join our conversation. Just call 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Shubhanjana, I want to go back to a tool that I hear a lot of people have been using in the last few weeks to find out where ICE enforcement is happening, to coordinate, the ICE watching, and that's Signal. Is this proven to be a safe tool for people to communicate privately, or have there been breaches there?
We have definitely seen breaches in the past. And I've had people reach out to me. And after the story came out, I am no tech expert, but people were just scrambling for information when groups, signal groups, rapid response groups were doxxed on X by right-wing influencers, and their names were taken out. This includes journalists whose Signal usernames explicitly says they are a journalist, and they have noticed infiltration. And I should say, when I speak to organizers, especially organizers from, example, Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Committee, they're a massive team and they have been extremely active. And what they told me is that they operate with the knowledge that their Signal groups are infiltrated, because these Signal groups, the numbers of people who are joining them, after a point, it became impossible to vet each and every person that's joining these Signal groups.
Because they were overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed with interest. Is that what? Yeah,
absolutely. They were reaching the capacity, and so there was a priority call of do we spend time vetting each and every person who wants to be on this rapid response Signal group, or do we actually welcome more? Because there was a massive interest to join these rapid response groups right after Renee Good's killing, is what these groups told me, the community organizers, is that there was an instant spike in interest. And so it became impossible to vet these Signal groups anymore. So a lot of these groups that have reached capacity are operating with that knowledge. And what they told me is that they even limit the information they are sharing on Signal. If it's something like, for example, a family that's vulnerable needs help, when it comes to sharing the address, some people told me that they are resorting to word of mouth, that they are no longer relying on their digital devices because they are absolutely not confident in the encryption that Signal promises, because they've seen that infiltration. And that was absolutely fascinating to me, is that some of these organizers are not just deleting their social media, but they're saying, we are meeting in person and we're discussing amongst each other as word of mouth, old school style.
Yeah. I mean, there's the technological protection of the fact that it's encrypted, and that's pretty darn good. If I know that I'm talking to you on Signal, I can be pretty confident. The problem is in these larger groups when we don't actually know who are the other 100 people on the group. And that's not so much about technology as it is about just old-fashioned eavesdropping. And that's a very big vulnerability.
We have Julie in St. Paul who wants to share something. Julie, what do you want to share with us?
Hi, yeah. I was curious about the vulnerability of GPS. A lot of us are doing mutual aid, going directly to vulnerable neighbors' homes. And I'm curious kind of what we should be thinking about with using Google Maps and things like that.
That's a great question, Julie. I mean, I think a lot of people are in Julie's position right now if they're involved in mutual aid. Bill, what vulnerabilities are there with GPS?
Well, so basically having a cell phone on you makes you carry a location tracking device to some degree. The Stingray device that Subhanjana mentioned before is just one of the kinds of ways that location tracking through the phone can happen. Actually, interestingly, the Supreme Court has not done very much to sort of expand Fourth Amendment rights in the last 10 or 15 years. One of the places they have done it is there. So they have had several cases where they've found Fourth Amendment violations from extensive location tracking operations, because they said, basically, you carry around a phone. Everyone has to carry around a phone. It's a necessity of modern life. And this allows the government to have location tracking on potentially everybody. If it's possible to literally leave your phone at home, that is the safest thing to do.
Well, how do we know how to get anywhere?
Remember when you used to print it out before you went?
On MapQuest,
yes.
I do.
In all seriousness, I mean, this goes back, I think, to what I said earlier. The ubiquity of the surveillance technology is such that, your own security and privacy when you engage in these activities is very difficult to police. And I think that you can take a lot of precautions, but you also have to be aware that you are very likely identifiable by ICE.
And I just want to add that the concern Julie has is something that was one of the biggest concerns I heard from people who are like, I don't care about me. I want to protect the people I am trying to protect. I think what some of these people told me is that they've resorted to, for example, not using the same car where possible. If they're doing grocery drops or they're just dropping food to families who are vulnerable, not using the same car, not using GPS or location services. That's a really one of the easier ones, I suppose, for them to track, because there's multiple other ways they can track your location. Even some people have had to take a step back for a few days to sort of what they think was falling off the radar. So I think there's some protection in numbers, I would suppose, is that you swap out cars. Again, these are things that have been told to me. Swap out cars on the way. You don't rely on the same person every day to go and do those drop-offs, because that makes the person on the other end receiving those services extremely vulnerable.
I mean, you can get very elaborate. There are things called Faraday bags that you can put your phone into. But, then we start to become secret
we are
agents.
Spying operations here.
Right. I mean,
Exactly.
if you want to try and out technology ICE, you're not probably going to win that arms race. You can take some sensible precautions, but you have to be realistic about the limits.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's great. Jack in Eden Prairie has been waiting. Jack, what do you want to share with us?
Yeah,
Jack, are you still with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Sure can. Go ahead.
Yeah, super interesting conversation. I recently got to see the logical diagram of the Palantir surveillance technology. That's super powerful. Everything we do is in there. My question is, what type of law would need to be passed that would maybe require a warrant for that technology to be used against American citizens, and in which level of state or federal government would that be effective?
Yeah, that's a great
Bill,
question.
what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, so take facial recognition as an example of a technology that law enforcement has used. About half the states have now passed laws that limit their state law enforcement in the way that they use facial recognition. About 15 of them have really strong limits, like, just as the caller suggests, requiring a warrant before you go and look at it. And that's pretty robust protection, because that's an order by a judge that there's probable cause that the person is involved in a crime and that there's specificity about what you're looking for. If you can do all that, then that's probably a search that we actually want law enforcement to be able to engage in. So those states have required warrants for use of facial recognition. It would be equally possible to require warrants for use of other kinds of databases that are not facial databases, things like this Palantir database. If it's going to affect federal agents, it would have to be a federal law, and that would mean Congress. Or it's at least possible someday the Supreme Court will continue its expansive reading of the Fourth Amendment to cover these things, but I'm not waiting for that.
So it sounds like, Bill, some states have actually passed new laws that tighten rules and require warrants. Where does Minnesota fit into all of that?
So Minnesota is one of about half the states that's passed some rules, but they're pretty modest at the state level. It's basically just tied to body cameras, and you can't use facial recognition in conjunction with that. The city of Minneapolis, however, has simply banned the use of facial recognition by its government, including its police force. It's just not allowed.
Catherine, if I can add something just to that, because the caller mentioned surveillance of American citizens, and I think this is something that was increasingly told to me by experts, is that a lot of this surveillance technology, like Bill mentioned, the immigration OS that's being built, it's a whole dragnet that's being called, right? And I just want to bring to attention that it's being what one of the experts told me is that ICE is going on a surveillance shopping spree with that extra $7 billion that they have, right? So they're not relying on one source of data. They are trying to slurp up all different kinds of sources so that they can build this dossier that they're building on individuals. And what was jarring to me while I was reporting on this is that it is being bought and invested on under the guise of immigration enforcement. I think it's important for people to understand that the kind of mass surveillance that these technologies can do blurs that line completely, because this technology is not trained to or neither is being used with the intention to differentiate between, absolute worst of the worst, as DHS calls it, and just simply dissenting American citizens. It's all of it. Those lines are completely blurred. Something that was also jarring to me that I want to bring into attention is that the intensity of some of these technology mirrors and sort of brings to mind in technologists who are studying this is that this is the kind of surveillance surveillance that America uses perhaps in Iraq and Afghanistan and has used. And then this is the kind of surveillance that was being used along the borders to create a digital wall for surveillance along borders. And now they're being pushed into cities. DC, Chicago, Minneapolis, I spoke to people from DC and Chicago, and they were just repeating these things to me is that, are you seeing drones? Are you seeing more helicopters? Oh my gosh, they're repeating the playbook. And they're hoping that we don't talk to each other. And they think that people are saying that I'm a citizen, why should I be concerned? It's not, this system doesn't know how to, or perhaps intentionally isn't discriminating.
Yeah, and Bill, I'm wondering if there is actually a meaningful legal distinction between surveillance of non-citizens versus U.S. citizens, protesters, people who, were born here and are doing ICE survey or ICE watch. I mean, what is the difference if there is any?
Well, so when it comes to constitutional rights, not the ones we're talking about, not really. The Fourth Amendment, the right of habeas corpus, the First Amendment, those apply to citizens, non-citizens, visitors, everyone. There are, of course, certain powers that the immigration authorities have around, their checks at the border and some other exceptions that apply in immigration, but they're not generally things that apply, on the streets of your own city, right? That's not where we think of border control as in fact happening.
We're taking now a question from Megan on Facebook. She wrote in to say, I'm wondering what they will intend to do with the information about activists aside from location tracking and having knowledge of their movements. I mean, do we have a sense of that right now? And I'll start with you, Bill, and I'd love to hear Shubhanjana what you think as well.
Well, first of all, they're going to add it to the database, right? They're going to
whatever
further
the database
right.
is.
They're going to further augment the data that they have. I mean, the answer is we don't know, and I'm going to link this up with the earlier question too. There's one other thing that Congress can do, and that is exercise its appropriations and budgetary authority and its oversight authority to ask all of these questions. Because part of what's concerning about this is the scope of it, but part of what's concerning is the opacity of it. And if we can, have better transparency about what the databases are, how they are used, whether those are legitimate purposes. I mean, I think back to when Edward Snowden did his whistleblowing. The programs that he exposed are gone now. Congress, cut back on them and cut back on them, cut the funding, impose new conditions. They're not part of the law anymore. Of course, they've been replaced by some other surveillance, as we're hearing, but Congress does have the ability to intervene not just by passing a law, but also by keeping an eye on DHS and how they're spending this money.
Shubhanjana, what do we know?
We don't. I think I second what Bill is saying, is that the fear is that we don't, because again, like I said, we haven't seen this kind of technology and being used in cities against people protesting. There's this video that I came across in my research that was most relevant, is that there was this observer, protester, just a bystander, whoever it was, recording an ICE agent, and the ICE agent was taking that person's photos, and she asks on the video, we can hear, is that, what are you going to do with that photo? And she was laughing about it, but he says that we're going to add it to our little database of domestic terrorists. And I think that I've heard that concern before, is that when I ask people that, what do you think is happening with this database? Because some of the technology that they're using in the user guide, it's actually encouraged by agents on the field to add to the database, to collect information on ground. If they are not scanning your face, they're taking your photo, and they're taking your license plate photo. The license plate photo, by this point of this conversation, I guess, is understandable what they're doing with it. But with the photos, we've also seen some internal communications between DHS, is that they are building a database of dissenters who are coming in the way of, we're just annoying their operations, not even impeding. I think that's really important to differentiate. These people are not impeding, and that's one of the reasons why they're recording, to have that evidence.
We only have a few minutes left, but I want to go to Rodan, who I understand is calling from the west coast of Ireland, a beautiful part of the world. What do you want to share with us?
Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my call. Yeah, I know I'm phoning from Europe, and maybe I shouldn't comment, but and I'm not fully
familiar. Oh, please. No, we want you to.
Okay. I've been listening closely since the various events, and which we won't go into, but how do people, individual citizens of the United States, what do they do if they feel their First or Second or Fourth Amendment has been infringed upon? And secondly, it seems to me that people are scared of the government in the United States, but maybe I'm wrong. That's the impression I get. In Europe, we're not scared of the government. We might complain about them, we're not scared of them. That's my point. That's all.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for calling. Bill, I'm going to let you take this one. What can someone do if they feel like their rights have been violated?
Well, so there's a very large number of lawsuits happening right now across town in the courthouse in Minneapolis. They're being brought by individuals. They're being brought by the National Lawyers Guild or the American Civil Liberties Union. And they're essentially making claims of constitutional violations. And a number of the judges here in Minneapolis have rendered rulings that have limited or constrained or certainly looked for more information about what's going on. So I do find some comfort and hope in the fact that judges are engaging in the kind of scrutiny that people who have been targeted are asking them to. But it's slow. It's slow. Yeah. And it requires courageous pro bono attorneys most of the time to be stepping forward to take those cases. So it is an imperfect response, but it is one thing that gives me some comfort.
And I would argue that response has to start with awareness, with conversations that of awareness that we are being surveilled in a way that nobody who has any expectation of privacy or shouldn't be. And that's, as Bill said, citizens, non-citizens alike. And I think awareness is a big part of that.
Well, I want to thank our guests for tonight. We had William McGivern. He is the Dean of the University of Minnesota Law School, where he teaches data privacy. And we had Shubhanjana Das. She is a reporter with the Sahan Journal who's been covering these issues during the federal immigration crackdown in Minnesota. This conversation was produced by Carrie Dwyer. I'll be back here tomorrow night at 8, and I hope you'll join me. We'll talk about how some people are responding to the ICE surge in Minnesota as protesters, some as volunteers or legal observers, and what the tactics reveal about the future of organized protest. Have a good evening.